Okay, hi everyone. So today Emma has come to me with a particular scenario for one of her customers, which I thought might be good example content to demonstrate a real world use case for SharePoint lists. We have run through this scenario a little bit before this call, just so I can get the full context and make sure that it's going to be a useful watch for you all. And I think it will be. So what I thought we'd do on today's call is first of all say hello to the wonderful Emma. Hi, Emma.
Hello.
Hi. And I'm gonna ask Emma to walk through the situation that customer's in, and then we're gonna walk through how that solution, how that challenge or problem will translate into a solution using SharePoint lists. And we're actually going to build out that SharePoint list. There are going to be, or should be, medium term, some automations associated with that list. We're not going to delve into that today. This is just really going to be building out the SharePoint list and talking a little bit about the automations. So let's get stuck straight in. Do you want to talk me through what your customer's looking for, Emma?
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, they need or want a solution whereby they can track all of the kind of like tasks and actions that come off the back of our bi-weekly strategy meetings. So each week, or every other week, we will host this meeting whereby it will be more of a strategic one, whereby it could be anything ranging from like service tickets that need to kind of be addressed and chased up to more of like the broader like strategic things where every item that will sort of come of it will go into this Microsoft spreadsheet, and then it will be assigned a user just by filling in the boxes that they kind of made within the table that they've created. They feel like that's too manual and they would like some sort of like automation or just an easier way of doing it. So basically just a list of actions and associated users slash when the action was created, and yeah, just making it a bit more user friendly, to be honest.
Gotcha. Okay. So what they're doing is working. It's working in Excel, but they're looking to make that a bit more visually appealing by the
Appealing.
sounds of things, and potentially look to apply some automations to that as well.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay. So that type of thing is ideal for a SharePoint list, because one way that I explain SharePoint list to people is that see it like an Excel spreadsheet, but with the potential to apply automations. We can use Power Automate to take actions based on triggers that apply to that list. For example, when a new list item is added, do X, Y, and Z. When a due date is within 7 days, email persons A, B, and C. And that type of thing, you can't really easily do it in Excel. So I think SharePoint list is ideal for this type of situation. We can also benefit from item level security in SharePoint. So if indeed they wanted to, at a later stage, we can say things like, if the item is a strategy item, then only allow persons A, B, and C to see it. If item is a service desk item, allow persons D, E, and F to see it. And we can do that type of thing in there as well. So I think it sounds ideal for a SharePoint list. One question I do have is, who wants to access this list, and where are those people situated digitally? Are they all in the same tenancy, or are they on different 365 tenancies?
So it varies. So everyone that needs access to the list is basically everyone who joins the bi-weekly strategy meetings. That's a combination of internal people at the company that I work at, along with the people who attend the meeting from the customer side. So not everyone's in the same tenancy because those users from the customer side are obviously external.
Gotcha.
But everyone that attends that meeting needs to have access to that Microsoft list, so everyone can kind of keep track of what's sort of in there and what everyone needs to be doing, because that list is kind of like a to-do list for everyone in that meeting as opposed to just the MSP side of it, for instance. Yeah.
Fine. Okay. So there is a sort of decision point that we need to make here about where we host this. So whether you want to host this on your tenancy or their tenancy. There's two reasons that's really relevant. One is data sovereignty. So if this does contain sensitive or confidential information, whose tenancy is that in? My recommendation is to keep this in the customer's tenancy, but that is a decision that you need to make with the customer.
So for context as well, because I'm going to be sort of like the primary person using it, and kind of like keeping it up to date, I think it'll probably make the most sense to keep it within our tenancy. So I've kind of got, well, at least I'm sort of like the main host of it, I guess. In terms of the information in it, there actually isn't anything too confidential in there. Obviously, there's stuff discussed in confidence, but it's not like detrimental if anyone sees it. I wouldn't necessarily class the information in there as confidential by any stretch of the imagination. So I think keeping it within our tenancy probably makes the most sense.
Yeah, I think that's fine. If there's no sensitive information, that lowers the risk profile. I would nudge back slightly on the fact that data sovereignty, it really should still be in their tenancy. And even if it is in their tenancy, you can be a guest user and have owner permissions of the site or the list. So it's not going to restrict the level of management that you have. But I do also understand if it's on your tenancy, that does give you a bit more direct access to it. So just wanted to point out that decision point. They're the facts around it, and you can make the decision based on what's right for you and the customer. The other thing to consider is it sounds to me like you're going to want to assign list items to individuals as owners of those items, so that you can track who's responsible for an item in a list. Now, the built-in way into SharePoint, we can actually have a column called a person column, and we can actually pick people from the directory in which that SharePoint site is stored. So if it's stored in your tenancy, anyone that's a member of that site can be selected as a owner of a item in that person column. But if their people aren't on your tenancy, you won't be able to select them. So to solve that, we can do one of two things. We can invite their users as guests into your tenancy and then assign them member permissions of the SharePoint site that I'm going to recommend that we create. Or we don't use a person column at all, and we just use a text field, because that way you can just put any information in there. There's pros and cons to both. The pros of using a person field is we pull in information about that person, their email address, their phone number, and that makes automating tasks and notifications to that individual much easier. If you use a text field, the pros there are that you don't have to mess around inviting them as guests and things like that, but you lose that neatness of automation. So just wanted to draw your attention to that. I suspect you'll want to add them as guests, because that, while more fiddly to set up, will give you more long-term flexibility and a better structure.
Yeah, I think in terms of setting up, I think I'd rather give them the guest access to it, obviously with the owner permissions. I think that would probably make the most sense.
Fine. Okay, cool. So I suppose my final question here is, do you have, and I don't think it's appropriate to share it necessarily, but do you have the spreadsheet that they're using at the moment, and therefore the column headings that they're using at the moment?
I do, but I can't do a screen share of it.
No, and I don't think we ought to do that, but I'm just thinking you can read out the columns. And what I'm going to recommend is we actually just, for now, build out a SharePoint list that mirrors this spreadsheet like for like. And then actually we can build on that from there and start leveraging some of the benefits that we get for it being in SharePoint. But as a starting point, let's just replicate like for like. That's what I think we ought to do. So to kick things off, so that we can get stuck into this, I'm actually just behind the scenes going to create a SharePoint site. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick. And I've already logged into SharePoint Admin Center. And I'm just going to create a site for this purpose. For clarity, we could just create a list and share a list. There's various reasons why I want to create a site for this purpose that I'm not really going to go into now. So we're just going to create SharePoint Admin Center, active sites on the left, create new site. We're going to create a communications site here. We could create a team site, However, team site comes with a lot of other baggage. It'll also create a shared mailbox. With that, you have a calendar. It will create a whole area in Microsoft Teams. We don't need all that baggage. So we're just going to create a communication site for this purpose. I'm just going to go for a standard communication site template. And we're just going to call this test for now. Test 2. I've already got one called test apparently. And I'm just going to make myself the owner. Okay, and I'm going to create that site. Once that's created, we're going to jump in there and I'm going to start creating this list. It was slow on the demo. So let's find this. So test. Here we go. So just going to copy this and go. Open this in a new browser. Okay, so here's our newly created SharePoint site. I'm not going to go into the features of the site. We're just going to dive straight in and create a new list here. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, what is a list? A list, one of the ways that you can see a list is a visually appealing spreadsheet that can have automations built into it. It's far more than that, but when I'm talking to customers and when we're building out solutions to give them an insight into the types of things they can do with a list, that's one way that I explain it. So we're just simply going to go up to new and we're going to create a list. And it's going to do a blank list. You can choose templates and things, but I want to show you building this out from scratch. But if you're doing this yourself and you want to head start, you can actually have a play around with these templates. And I suspect one of these, probably the issue tracker, will actually fit our needs quite nicely here. We're not going to do that. We're going to create from blank. So one of the things we can actually do as well, which I hadn't mentioned at the beginning, is we can actually just bring in that spreadsheet. Now, we can't do that here for confidentiality reasons, but when you're building this out for your customer, you could just select your Excel file and that'll just bring it straight in. And then all you've got to do is amend the columns a little bit to your needs. And that'd be a much quicker way because it will bring in all the data for you as well.
Why would I set it up manually in SharePoint lists over bringing it in SharePoint then? Like, why would we rather do it like this? Just out of curiosity, like, is there an advantage to doing it this way over just bringing the spreadsheet straight into it?
But for one, I want to demo the setup of a SharePoint list. So if we bring in the Excel document, we're going to cut out a load of the steps that I want to show people who are watching this. That's one thing. Next thing is confidentiality. We can't really do that now because of the confidential information. But this call aside, there is only one reason why I would say, or one consideration. Personally, I would bring in the spreadsheet. So when you're building this out, I would actually bring in that spreadsheet. What you will find is when you go and amend the columns, like you've got an owner column in your spreadsheet, because those users, if you set that owner column as a person column, because those users don't exist, those cells are going to become blank. So there's some tweaking that has got to be done that you could argue by the time you've faffed around and done that, you could have just created it from blank. So there are decisions like that that dictate what route you go down. All of that said, I would be bringing it in from Excel when you're doing this.
No, that's helpful to know. It's more of just a call aside contextual question, but that's helpful. Thank you.
And I should have realised that before I rambled on my first 2 points, really. So let's get started with a blank list here. So I'm going to click blank and we're going to give this a name. Now, we agreed we'd call this action. You call this action tracker at the moment, don't you? So
yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to call this action tracker. I'm not going to give it a description and I am going to tick show in site navigation. So it will appear at the top of my SharePoint site here. So we can see action tracker. And we now have our blank list. So let's start adding some columns. So do you want to go give me the first column that we need in here?
Yeah, so the first column is category. So it will there's probably two main categories. To be honest, it's either going to be help desk for the kind of like smaller, more reactive things, and then strategy, which is more of like the proactive, or like IT roadmap stuff. So it's never not been one or the other. So I'd say those are the two categories that we need.
Okay, cool. So what we're essentially going to do now is add these columns exactly as you would do in an Excel spreadsheet, with the difference of we need to pick a type of column. And that's quite important. The type of column we pick dictates the data that we can put in the list items in that column. Very easy to add a column. We're just going to click add column here, and we get a list of the various options we've got. I'm not going to go through them all now, but I'm just going to say that because you want to have, remind me the name of this particular column.
Either
Category, is it?
yeah, category. So the choices in that are kind of strategy or kind of help desk support.
Okay. So so you have a choice what to select in this field, a choice of one of two items. So that is a choice column. So we're going to select choice. I'm going to click next. I'm going to give this a name, category.
Category has a name.
Thank you so much. My terrible spelling is always demonstrated on these calls. So we had service desk, I think was one option, and strategy. Okay, so we can give these colors as well. So I'm going to put strategy at the top. What we can do is give it a default value. I am going to give it a default value, I think, of strategy, because that's the majority. Is that fair?
I actually think they'd probably prefer not to,
Okay.
just because I think they're quite particular, and I think they wouldn't want it kind of presumptively entering anything that they wouldn't want it to.
Right, we don't want to upset a particular customer, so we'll leave that as default value none, and you can very easily just come in and change all of this at a later date. Bear in mind, and this happened the other day, if you change the type of column that something is, for example, if you've got a free-form text column and you tick the box to allow appending of data, and then you untick that box later, you lose your data. And fortunately, all of our customers have backups, so not a problem in that sense. But bear in mind, when you're changing columns, you need to consider your data availability and integrity when you're doing those changes. But you can change stuff. So we're going to leave default value as none. We have an option for a drop-down menu or radio buttons. We're just going to leave it as the default drop-down menu for now. We don't want to allow multiple selections, but that is available to you if you did. Require that this column contains information. I think you do want it to contain information, don't you? You don't want that ever left blank.
So if I left it blank, would that mean that it wasn't like a mandatory field to fill out? And then if we select yes, would it mean that if you didn't select like service desk or strategy, it would just come up as none?
So if we leave that to no, you can leave the field blank. It is not mandatory. If we set that to yes, it is mandatory, and you won't be able to save the list item until you fill it out.
I think probably set it as yes then, just so it doesn't get missed. It's quite an important column.
Okay. Enforce unique values, we're going to leave that to no. And add to all content types, we're not going to discuss that now. So I just wanted to go through some of the kind of high level common options here. So there we go. So we have our first column. I'm going to click save. What's the next column?
Next column is project/topic. So this is like a 1 or 2 word summary of what we're discussing. So maybe it might be that they're running out of SharePoint storage and someone's got some actions around that to look into 1 or 2 bits, but the category, the subject will just be SharePoint storage.
Cool. Okay, so my recommendation for that is just a text line, because there can be an unlimited variability in the content of that box. So a choice is really no good. That said, a choice would be better, but you would have to go out and fill out 100 different options, SharePoint, Teams, all of that stuff.
Just like the calls that we sort of do, it covers like so much ground. I think creating a list for that is a bit of an impossible task, because there's so many things that come up and there's not like a set agenda. Like it's quite literally a free for all to talk about whatever. So there's not like set categories as such. So I feel like text would probably be more appropriate.
I agree. So, and just to put this out there, I agree with that. By the way, it's impractical to use choice column. The reason choice columns are preferable, if they're possible, is for automations. We can say things like, if choice 1 is picked, then do X, Y, and Z. Whereas it's a little bit more fiddly to say, if text equals string, then do X, Y, and Z. There are complications. So just to give that piece of information, but we're going to select text here. We're going to go next. And you called this topic, didn't you?
Yeah, I think I'd prefer to call it subject.
It's a much better name. Yeah, I agree. We're going to leave it as blank by default. Yep. Maximum number of characters, 255. We could restrict that, and you could force people to keep things concise. If they're a particularly precise customer, they might not like that restriction.
Yeah, I think let's not put that in if we don't need to.
I chose my words carefully there with the word precise. Okay, so require this column contains information. I think you do require that column contains information. You never want that left blank.
No, I think the context behind each action is quite important. So yeah, I'd agree with that.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to touch on column validation. We're not going to set that, but I want to explain what it is.
Yeah.
You can say things like, you can create a formula to say, let's say you've got product codes in your business, and this is not a choice column, it's a free-form text column. But your product codes start with letter, number, so AB01. And whatever people put in here needs to conform to that standard. We can set up a rule to say, you can put whatever you want in here, but it has to be letter, number. That is an example of column validation. So you can do that sort of thing. What's actually quite nice nowadays as well is to create a formula. You can just go onto any AI tool, such as Perplexity or ChatGPT, and say, create me a formula for X, Y, and Z. Use natural language to tell it the formula that you want, paste it in there. 99 times out of 100, that's going to work for you. So I just wanted to let you know about that feature. So subject, we're going to save this, and let's speed up a little bit here. What have you got as your next column?
So next column is the actual action. So that's kind of like multiple lines of text that people will just sort of summarize what the kind of owner of that column will kind of need to do, / what everyone has sort of agreed upon. So just a text field basically called action.
Cool. So I'm going to recommend we select multiple lines of text here rather than single lines, because multiple lines just gives us more space to put in information. Now there's some considerations here, and you know one of these because we actually touched on this the other day. But I'm going to go multiple lines of text next. What did you want to give this?
Just action would be good.
Action. So multiple lines of text, that's fine. Under more options, we can choose, do we want to use rich text? So do you want fancy colors and underlines and things? I would say probably yes. There's no harm
in saying
yes. There's no harm. There is a piece of harm, minimal harm, I'll add. And I'll just mention this because if you were to create an automation, and we have a system that does exactly this, we have a platform that pulls out the information from certain columns and brings it into a Word document. It's for change management. So people can register a change management request, and that creates a document, goes to the senior managers for them to review. If you have rich text in your column, when you pull that information out, it pulls it out in plain text, and you get loads of funny formatting.
Oh, okay.
But you don't need to worry about that now, because if you did have that situation, there are solutions even to that problem. It just requires scripting and things like that. So just for educational purposes, want to throw that out there. I think for now, let's say yes, because it'll look nicer. This is really the important one here. So append changes to existing text. If I leave that blank, you'll just have a big box of information that you can type into. If I say yes to that, anytime you make an entry into that box, it will stamp that entry with the person who's made it and the time and the date. how that looks in the list is if we set this to no, you see the content of that field in the list here, right on the screen. If we set it to yes, you just see a link that says view entries, and you can only see the content of those appended entries when you click on view entries. So, and if you change this option later, you can lose your data. So this is something we need to decide, preferably now.
So I think they would prefer to have it set up with multiple lines of text that they could just type straight into. Yeah.
I think that's simpler for now. Actually, if I was having the conversation directly with the customer, I would gently be pushing back on them and suggesting that you can have granular history and things like that. But I think let's get a first iteration of this done. And if they like all of this, you can then make these improvements as you go. So I'm going to click save there. So we've got action. And what's the next column?
Next column is date raised. So the date that it was put into the spreadsheet, or action tracker, should I say.
Cool. Okay. So date and time field then. So we're going to click add column, date and time. Next. And so we're going to call this date raised. Oh, I nearly got it right.
So
Date
close.
raised. So close.
What happens if you fill out the description, just out of curiosity? Does anything happen visually wise when you save the column? Like does it affect anything, or is it just sort of like if you click into it, does it give you more context as to what the column's about? Just out of curiosity.
I will come back to that. I will put testing in there and I will show you once we've saved it.
Okay.
So moving down, type. Date and time, we've already selected that.
Yeah.
Do we want to include a time? Probably
No,
not.
it doesn't need to be that granular.
Friendly format, that is just going to say rather than number slash number slash number, it's going to say Wednesday, 1st of September.
I think they prefer that, yeah.
They prefer friendly.
Yeah.
They're a friendly bunch. Okay, we'll go
They
for
are.
friendly. Now, we're going to do something clever with this, or actually rather simple, but because this is a date raised field, I would say that it's almost always going to be the case that the date shown in it is the date the item is added into the list. Would I be correct on that?
Yeah, generally speaking, yeah.
And it can be changed. This is just the default value. So what we can do with a date field is drop this down and say, by default, it's going to show today's date.
Yeah.
More options. Require that this column contains information. It always will, because we've told it to give a default value of today's date. So we don't need to mess around with that field, and don't worry about unique values for the moment. I'm going to click save. Okay. Next column.
Next column is owner. So this is where we would apply, but this is who would be in charge of the action that's been put into this action tracker. But this could be kind of like myself or the service desk manager internally, or this could even be someone from their side and therefore makes it external. So I guess that's what you're probably talking about when you said like the guest access and the owner permissions.
Yeah, so yeah, and we did touch on this at the beginning. And we agreed that we are going to build this out using a person column. So I'm going to move forward with that context. So add column, person, next, and we're going to call this owner.
Yeah.
And what we can do here is allow the selection of groups if we want. That has automative complications. There's very few scenarios where we do tick that, but just know that it's there. I presume you just want a single owner for each.
Yeah, that's definitely how they'd prefer it. Yeah.
Cool. This is a nice option. It just looks prettier, in my opinion. Show profile photos. Yes, we're going to select yes to that. And I'll show you how that looks in a second. More options. Allow multiple selections. So you actually can have multiple owners if you wanted without the selection of groups. That could be turned on and off later with no data risk. So I'm going to leave that off for the moment. Require that this column contains information. Do you want this as mandatory?
Yeah, I think to not have anyone assigned to it would be a mistake. I think that just for the sake of continuity and making sure that nothing gets left and things don't get forgotten about, I think there should always be an owner assigned to it. So I think that should be a mandatory field.
I agree. Okay, so we're going to save. Okay, next column.
Next column is ticket number if available. So this is more applicable to the service desk line items that are more for the service desk manager internally. They're actually that's just ticket numbers. So just a numerical field would probably be good if that's available.
Sure is. So we're just going to select text.
Would it not be number?
No, sorry, stand corrected. Number. Thank you. And what we can do with this as well is we could do some fancy data validation if we wanted. I don't think it's sensible for the scope of this call, but if you've got a certain number format for your service desk tickets, like they always start with the year, for example, as is the case with some service desk tickets. I would point out it's quite unusual for service desk tickets just to be a number. Normally they start with something like TZ or TS or something like that. So if we do select this as a number field, you won't be able to put characters in here.
Yeah, so with the CRM system that we use, I appreciate it's actually quite unique, but it actually is just not a number field.
Nice.
So yeah, it's perfect.
Nice. Okay, so just some advanced options that I think are relevant. We want to remove the 1000 separator because that's really for currency. And we can set a minimum and a maximum value, which I don't think we ought to do here. I think we ought to leave this a little bit free form. So just going to click save there. And what's your next column?
Next column is deadline. So when that action needs to be completed by.
Oh, I think that's a date field.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm going to call this deadline. And we don't need to conclude a time. We're going to do friendly format because we've put the other column as friendly format. Now, I want to point something out with this column. So I'm just going to save this. And what I want to show is conditional formatting. So with each of these columns, we can format them in certain ways, color them. If we click on the column, go to column settings, and then we're going to go to, where is it? Format this column. And once it loads, going to load.
Doesn't look like it's loading.
Doesn't look like it's loading.
Standard
yeah,
when you're recording a video though, so this is fine.
Okay, all right, well, we can kick this into life, otherwise I'm afraid we might have to look at that another time. Let's just try this again. Column settings, format this column. Hey, okay, here we go. So what we can do is we can do format dates. Sorry about that. Just go column settings, format this column, do conditional formatting, and we can add a rule in here to basically say, so we're going to choose the column, deadline column, and say is after or is before, and we can say things like if this is within 7 days, go red, for example.
So can we do it for is before, 7 days before, and then, well, basically the example you just used, I think that would probably be quite good.
Yeah, so we can, but I want to highlight a limitation of this rule here. So what you'll notice about these rules, so if we say the deadline is before, we can say today or a specific date. There's no option in there to say within 7 days. So how do we do that? Well, unfortunately, we have to use advanced formatting. Not that difficult to do, but we just don't have, we have to create a script to do it. So to do that, you would just go to the formatting of this column and go to advanced mode. And what you're going to see here is what we call JSON script, JSON script, and looks very complicated. With the advent AI, anyone can create a JSON script. just to give you a quick example of that, if I dive into ChatGPT and we say, create me a JSON script for a SharePoint column to set the color to coral, which is the red one, if the date is within 7 days. And that's now going to create us a JSON script, which you just paste in there. I'm not going to do this now because we've got to add list items in there first, and then we've got to test it. But proof of concept wise, that's how you would achieve what you've just outlined there.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so what's your next column?
Next column is updates. So this is just another generic text field.
Is this the last column?
One more column after that is just status.
Okay, so just gonna, because we're running out of time, so just want to do updates, multiple lines of text. We're going to give this rich text, and we're going to leave it at that for now. And then you wanted a status column, which I presume is choice.
Yeah, so it's multiple choice and it's either in progress or completed. Those are the only two options we've got. We don't really tend to bother with options like new because that they become redundant quite quickly, and just kind of automatically fall into the in progress field anyway. So I think they'd prefer it to kind of stay as those two options, just in progress and complete.
So I'm just going to give these, leave those as those colors. And would you like a default value?
In progress, I think.
I agree. And we're going to leave it. So we have all of our columns. I am going to remove one of the default columns, which is title, because you use the subject column for your list items. Title is a default column added by SharePoint. So I'm just going to hide that column there. We can't delete it. We can only hide it.
Okay.
Now, I just want to show two things here in the 8 minutes we've got left. I want to show how we add a new item and a cool new feature that got added fairly recently to enable people to more elegantly add items to a list. So the two ways we can add an item here, if you've got access to the list as a member or an owner, you just click add item here and fill out the information. So title, only I spelled one word correctly. Strategy, subject. So I'm just going to fill this out with dummy data. You can see it's filled out today's date for date raised. Owner, then the only person we'll be able to select at the moment is me because I'm the only person that has access to the site, and you'll only be able to select owners and members and visitors as people in this people column. Ticket number 001, it's the first ticket ever raised. Deadline next week. Status is in progress, and we're going to click save. And what you'll see is we now have a list item appearing in here. I'm just going to go back into this category column and just change the color here because it didn't save our color for some reason. And I like the pretty colors. There we go. So we've got strategy there now. There is another way to add items to this list, and we can use the forms feature. Prior to this forms feature, for people who don't have access to this list to add an item, we would have to create a form in Microsoft Forms and then configure Power Automate to pull that form response and place it in a list. Microsoft have integrated forms into lists now, so it's super easy for anyone to do. We can just click Forms, new form. So we'll call this Submit Action Item, just as an example. By default, this is going to include all of the information or all of the columns that we've configured for people to fill out. You can untick those columns down the side here, or you can move them around as exactly as you would if you were building out a Microsoft form. And it's automatically saved our changes. And we're going to get a link to this form. Click Send Form, copy link. And we should any second now get a link. What you can do is you can send that link to anyone. When they click on it, this is what they will see. They will see a fairly pleasant looking form that they can fill out things onto. And the item will go on the list automatically. One use case for that we use at Atomic is for people to log issues. We are big on feedback. Any problems at the business or with customers we want to know about. And so we have a form called submit an issue. Anyone could submit the form, but we don't really want everyone seeing the contents of the list because people might be submitting confidential issues that they don't want everyone to see. So having this mechanism in place is really, really nice. The next thing I want to touch on very, very briefly is views. So I'm going to add another item here, but we're just going to add a service desk item. So just going to fill this stuff out. I'm going to make me the owner. Ticket number 002 and in progress. So one of the reasons I think lists will be good for this particular use case over and above Excel, this can be done in Excel, it just does it better in as a SharePoint list, is we can create a new view over here. And as you can see, we've got two list items, service desk and strategy. And I'm going to create a view that's only going to show us service desk items, for example. So we're going to go add view. I'm going to call it service desk. The list. I'm going to make this public. Public view can be seen by anyone that has access to this list. I'm going to choose create. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to click on here and I'm going to go edit current view. And what we're going to be presented with now is the classic SharePoint editor. I'm just going to scroll down and under filter, I'm going to set the column, which is category, is equal to service desk. And submit. And what we should see shortly is on that view, I'm only now seeing service desk items. So you can create views to show anything. What you probably want to do on this default view is I would suggest we edit this view to only show in progress items. So the moment you set something to be completed, it disappears from this list. And we have another view called completed so that you can easily dart back and go, hang on, what was that? Let's review that particular item that we completed earlier. And so I think this views structure will be really nice for this particular customer.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay. How does all that sound? Is that giving you a starting point to build something out for them?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's giving me a proper good head start, actually. And I think they'll much prefer this as opposed to what they're using now. So that was really helpful, actually.
Right. Okay, cool. So I'm going to leave it there. Hope everyone found this sort of fairly casual introduction to lists helpful. If you need help setting up lists, if you have questions about SharePoint's capability or functionality, or even if you've got advanced use cases for SharePoint, such as approvals, document management, managing your ISO platform within SharePoint, we have various different solutions available for those types of things. So if you do need help, please reach out via our website, atomic.co.uk. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Thanks, Emma.
Great, thanks.